Soldier back on its duty. Chapter 6. Resume. I don't believe it. I can't believe it. Repeated resume, trying in confusion to disprove Raskolnikov's arguments. They were by now approaching Bakale's rooms, where Pulcheria Alexandrovna and Dunya had been expecting them a long while. Razumihin kept stopping on the way in the heat of discussion, confused and excited by the very fact that they were for the first time speaking openly about it. Raskolnikov, don't believe it then. You were noticing nothing as usual, but I was weighing every word. Resuming, you are suspicious. That is why you weighed their words. Hmm. Certainly, I agree. Porphyry's tone was rather strange, and still more that worthless Zamitor. You're right. There was something about him. But why? Why? Raskolnikov. He has changed his mind since last night. Resuming. Quite the opposite. If they had that brainless idea, they would do their best to hide it and hide their cards so as to catch you later. But it was all rude and careless. Raskolnikov. If they had facts, I mean real facts, or at least grounds for suspicion, then they would certainly have tried to hide their game in the hope of getting more. They would have made a search long ago, besides. But they have no facts, not one. It's all illusion, all unclear, simply a floating idea. So they tried to throw me off by being bold. And perhaps he was annoyed at having no facts and blurted it out in his frustration. Or perhaps he has some plan. He seems an intelligent man. Perhaps he wanted to frighten me by pretending to know. They have a psychology of their own, brother. But it is sickening explaining it all. Stop. Resuming. And it's insulting. Insulting. I understand you. But since we have spoken openly now, and it is an excellent thing that we have at last, I'm glad. I will admit now openly that I noticed it in them long ago, this idea. Of course, the tiniest hint only a sneaky suggestion. But why even a suggestion? How dare they? What basis do they have? If only you knew how furious I have been. Think only, simply because a poor student, broken by poverty and deep sadness, on the night before a severe feverish illness, note that suspicious, vain, proud, who has not seen a soul to speak to for 6 months, in rags and in boots without soles, has to face some miserable policeman and put up with their rudeness and the unexpected debt forced under his nose, the unpaid note presented by Chevreau, the new paint, 86 degrees Fahrenheit and a suffocating air, a crowd of people. They talk about the murder of a person where he had been just before, and all that on an empty stomach. He might have a fainting fit, and that is what they based it all on. Damn them! I understand how annoying it is, but in your place, Ruria, I would laugh at them, or better still, spit in their ugly faces, and spit a dozen times in all directions. I'd hit out in all directions, neatly too, and so I'd put an end to it. Damn them! Don't be downhearted. It's a shame. Raskolnikov thinking. He really has put it well, though. Raskolnikov. Damn them! But the questioning again tomorrow, he said with bitterness. Must I really enter into explanations with them? I feel annoyed as it is that I lowered myself to speak to Zamido yesterday in the restaurant. Resume. Damn it, I'll go myself to Porphyry. I'll squeeze it out of him. As one of the family, he must let me know the ins and outs of it all. And as for Zamido, Raskolnikov thinking. At last, he sees through him, thought Raskolnikov. Resuming, stay. You were wrong. I have thought it out. You are wrong. How was that a trap? You say that the question about the workman was a trap. But if you had done that, could you have said you had seen them painting the room and the workman? On the contrary, you would have seen nothing. Even if you had seen it, who would admit it against himself? Raskolnikov. If I had done that thing, I should certainly have said that I had seen the workman in the room. He answered with hesitation and obvious disgust. Mouth brushes. Resume him. Why speak against yourself? Raskolnikov. Because only peasants or the most uneducated beginners deny everything completely at hearings. If a man is even a little bit smart and experienced, he will certainly try to admit all the outside facts that can be avoided, but will look for other explanations of them. Will bring in some special, unexpected term that will give them another meaning and put them in another light. Porphyry might well expect that I should be sure to answer so, and say I'd seen them to give a look of truth, and then make some explanation. Resume. But he would have told you at once that the workman could not have been there for 2 days before, and that therefore you must have been there on the day of murder at 8 o'clock, and so he would have caught you over a small detail. Raskolnikov. Yes, that is what he was counting on, that I should not have time to think. I should be in a hurry to make the most likely answer. And so would forget that the workman could not have been there 2 days before. Resume him. But how could you forget it? Raskolnikov. Nothing easier. It is in just such stupid things clever people are most easily caught. The more tricky a man is, the less he suspects that he will be caught in simple things. The more tricky a man is, the simpler the trap he must be caught in. Porphyry is not such a fool as you think. Resume. He's a crook then? If that is so, Raskolnikov could not help laughing. But at the very moment, he was struck by the strangeness of his own openness and the eagerness with which he had made this explanation, though he had kept up all the previous conversation with gloomy disgust. Obviously, with a motive out of necessity, Raskolnikov thinking, I'm starting to enjoy some part of this, he thought to himself. But almost at the same instant, he became suddenly uneasy, as though an unexpected and alarming idea had occurred to him. His uneasiness kept on increasing. They had just reached the entrance of Bakaleus. Raskolnikov, go in alone, said Raskolnikov suddenly. I'll be back soon. Where are you going? Why? We're just here. I can't help it. I will come in half an hour. Tell them. Say what you like. I'll come with you. Let's go home. You too want to torture me? He screamed with such bitter anger, such despair in his eyes that Resume's hands dropped. He stood for some time on the steps, looking gloomily at Raskolnikov, walking rapidly away in the direction of his room. At last, grinding his teeth and clenching his fist, he swore he would squeeze Porfiry like a lemon that very day, and went up the stairs to Kompulkeria, who was by now alarmed at their long absence. When Raskolnikov got home, his hair was soaked with sweat and he was breathing heavily. He went rapidly up the stairs, walked into his unlocked room, and at once fastened the latch. Then, in mindless terror, he rushed to the corner, to that hole under the paper where he had put the things, put his hand in, and for some minutes felt carefully in the hole, in every crack and fold of the paper. Finding nothing, he got up and drew a deep breath as he was reaching the steps of Baccalaos. He suddenly imagined that something, a chain, a button, or even a bit of paper in which they had been wrapped with the old woman's handwriting on it, might somehow have slipped out and been lost in some crack, and then might suddenly turn up as unexpected final evidence against him. He stood as though lost in thought, and a strange, beaten, half mindless smile stayed on his lips. He took his cap at last and went quietly out of the room. His ideas were all tangled. He went dreamily through the gateway. Horror. Here he is himself, shouted a loud voice. He raised his head. The porter was standing at the door of his little room and was pointing him out to a short man who looked like a worker, wearing a long coat and a vest, and looking at a distance remarkably like a woman. He bent forward, and his hat, in a greasy cap, hung forward. From his wrinkled, loose face, he looked over 50. His little eyes were lost in fat, and they looked out grimly, sternly, and unhappily. Raskolnikov, what is it? He asked, going up to the park. The man stole a look at him from under his brows, and he looked at him carefully, slowly. Then he turned slowly and went out of the gate into the street without saying a word. Raskolnikov, what is it? He cried. Poor, why? He there was asking whether a student lived here. Mentioned your name and whom you rented from. I saw you coming and pointed you out, and he went away. It's funny. The porter too seemed rather confused, but not much so. And after wondering for a moment, he turned and went back to his room. Raskolnikov ran after the stranger, and at once caught sight of him walking along the other side of the street with the same even, slow step with his eyes fixed on the ground. As though deep in thought, he soon caught up to him, but for some time walked behind him. At last, moving side by side with him, he looked at his face. The man noticed him at once, looked at him quickly, but dropped his eyes again. And so they walked for a minute side by side without saying a word. Raskolnikov, you were asking of me, of the porter. You were asking for me of the porter, he said at last, but in a curiously quiet voice. The man made no answer. He didn't even look at him. Again, they were both silent. Raskolnikov, why do you come and ask for me and say nothing? What's the meaning of it? His voice broke. He seemed unable to say the words clearly. The man raised his eyes this time and turned a gloomy, scary look at Raskolnikov. Stranger. Murderer! He said suddenly in a quite clear and distinct voice. Raskolnikov went on walking beside him. His legs felt suddenly weak. Cold shiver ran down his back, and his heart seemed to stand still for a moment. Then suddenly began beating fast, as though it were set free. So they walked for about 100 steps, side by side in silence. The man did not look at him. Raskolnikov. What do you mean? What is? Who is a murderer? Muttered Raskolnikov. Murderer, Raskolnikov, hardly loudly enough to be heard. Stranger, you are a murderer. The man answered still more clearly and strongly, with a smile of hateful victory. And again he looked straight into Raskolnikov's pale face and frightened eyes. They had just reached the crossroads. The man turned to the left without looking behind him. Raskolnikov remained standing, staring after him. He saw him turn round 50 steps away and look back at him, still standing there. Raskolnikov could not see clearly, but he imagined that he was again smiling, the same smile of cold hatred and victory. With slow, unsteady steps, with shaking knees, Raskolnikov made his way back to the little attic room, feeling chilled all over. He took off his cap and put it on the table. And for 10 minutes, he stood without moving. Then he sank exhausted on the sofa. With a weak cry of pain, he stretched himself on it. So he lay for half an hour. He thought of nothing. Some thoughts or pieces of thoughts, some images without order or connection floated before his mind. Faces of people he had seen in childhood or met somewhere once, whom he would never have remembered. The bell tower of the church at V, the billiard table in a restaurant, some officers playing billiards, the smell of cigars in some underground tobacco shop, a bar room, a back staircase quite dark, all wet with dirty water and covered with eggshells, and the Sunday bells floating in from somewhere. The images followed one another, spinning like a stone. Some of them he liked, tried to catch, but they faded, and all the while there was a heavy weight within him. But it was not crushing, sometimes it was even pleasant. The slight shivering still continued, but that too was an almost pleasant feeling. He heard the hurried footsteps of Razumihin, closed his eyes, and pretended to be asleep. Razumihin opened the door and stood for some time in the doorway as though unsure. Then he stepped softly into the room and went carefully to the sofa. Raskolnikov heard Nastasia's whisper, Nastasia, don't disturb him. Let him sleep. He can have his dinner later. Razumihin, quite so. Both left carefully and closed the door. Another half hour passed. Raskolnikov opened his eyes, turned on his back again, locking his hands behind his head. Raskolnikov thinking, who is he? Who is that man who sprang out of the earth? Where was he? What did he see? He has seen it all? That's clear. Where was he then? And from where did he see? Why has he only now sprang out of the earth? And how could he? Is it possible? Hmm. Continued Raskolnikov, turning cold and shivering. 20 seconds break. And the jewel case Nicole found behind the door. Was it possible? A clue. You miss a tiny detail, and you can build it into a mountain of evidence. A fly flew by and saw it. Is it possible? He felt with sudden disgust how weak, how physically weak he had become. I ought to have known it, he thought with a bitter smile. And how dare I, knowing myself, knowing how I should be, take up an axe and shed blood? I ought to have known beforehand. Ah, but I did know, he whispered in despair. At times, he stopped with some thought. No, those men are not made so. The real master to whom all is allowed storms Toul, makes a slaughter in Paris, forgets an army in Egypt, wastes 500,000 men in the Moscow trip, and gets off. They joke at Vilna, and altars are set up to him after his death, and so all is allowed. No, such people, it seems, are not of flesh but of bronze. One sudden random idea almost made him laugh. Napoleon, the pyramids, Waterloo, and a miserable skinny old woman, a pawnbroker with a red chest under her bed. It's a nice mess for Porfiry Petrovich to figure out. How can they figure it out? It's too messy. And Napoleon creeped under an old woman's bed. Ah, how sickening. At moments, he felt he was talking wildly. He sank into a state of furious excitement. The old woman is of no importance, he thought, coldly and wildly. The old woman was a mistake, perhaps, but she is not what matters. The old woman was only a sickness. I was in a hurry to step over the line. I didn't kill a human being, but a rule. I killed the rule, but I didn't step over. I stopped on this side. I was only capable of. I was only capable of killing, and it seems I wasn't even capable of that. A rule. Why was that fool Razumihin attacking the socialists? They are hardworking business people. The happiness of all is their goal. No, life is only given to me once and I shall never have it again. I don't want to wait for the happiness of all. I want to live myself. Or else, better not to live at all. I simply couldn't walk past my mother starving, keeping my coin in my pocket while I waited for the happiness of all. I'm putting my little brick into the happiness of all. And so my heart is at peace. Ha! Why have you let me slip? I only live once. I too want. Oh, I'm a useless bug and nothing more. He added suddenly, laughing like a madman. Yes, I'm certainly a bug. He went on, holding on to the idea, enjoying it, playing with it with bitter pleasure. In the first place, because I can reason that I'm one, and secondly, because for a month past I've been troubling like kind God, calling him to witness that not for my ungodly desires did I do it, but with a grand and noble goal. Ha ha. Thirdly, because I aimed at carrying it out as fairly as possible, weighing, measuring, and calculating. Of all the bugs I picked out the most useless one, and planned to take from her only as much as I needed for the first step, no more, no less. So the rest would have gone to a church home, according to her will. Ha. And what shows that I am completely a bug, he added, grinding his teeth, is that I am perhaps worse and more disgusting than the bug I killed. And I felt beforehand that I should tell myself so after killing her. Can anything be compared with the horror of that? The cheapness, the lowliness. I understand the prophet with his sword. On his horse, God commands and trembling creation must obey. The prophet is right. He's right when he sets a cannon again across the street and blows up the innocent and the guilty without bothering to explain. It's for you to obey, trembling creation, and not to have desires, for that's not you. I shall never, never forgive the old woman. His hair was soaked with sweat. His shaking lips were dry. His eyes were fixed on the ceiling. Raskolnikov thinking, Mother, sister, how I love them. Why do I hate them now? Yes, I hate them. I feel a physical hatred for them. I can't stand them near me. I went up to my mother and kissed her. I remembered to hug her and think if she only knew. Shall I tell her then? That's just what I might do. She must be the same as I am, he added, forcing himself to think, as it were struggling with wild thoughts. Ah, how I hate the old woman now. I feel I should kill her again if she came to life. Poor Lizaveta. Why did she come in? It's strange though, was it? I hardly ever think of her, as though I hadn't killed her. Lizaveta, Sonia, poor gentle things with gentle eyes. Dear woman, why don't they cry? Why don't they groan? They give up everything. Their eyes are soft and gentle. Sonia, Sonia, gentle Sonia, gentle Sonia. He lost consciousness. It seemed strange to him that he didn't remember how he got into the street. It was late evening. The darkness had fallen, and the full moon was shining more and more brightly. But there was a strange stuffiness in the air. There were crowds of people in the street. Workers and business people were making their way home. Other people had come out for a walk. There was a smell of cement, dust, and stale water. Raskolnikov walked along, sad and anxious. He was clearly aware of having come out with a purpose, of having to do something in a hurry. But what it was, he had forgotten. Suddenly, he stood still and saw a man standing on the other side of the street, waving to him. He crossed over to him, but at once the man turned and walked away with his head hanging, as though he had made no sign to him. Wait, did he really wave? Raskolnikov wondered, but he tried to catch up to him. When he was within 10 steps, he recognized him and was frightened. It was the same man with bent shoulders in the long coat. Raskolnikov followed him at a distance. His heart was beating. They went down a turn. The man still did not look round. Does he know that I'm following him? Thought Raskolnikov. The man went into the entrance of a big house. Raskolnikov hurried to the gate and looked in to see whether he would look round and signal to him. In the courtyard, the man did turn around and again seemed to wave to him. Raskolnikov at once followed him into the yard, but the man was gone. He must have gone up the first staircase. He rushed after him. He heard slow and steady steps 2 floors above. The staircase felt strangely familiar. He reached the window on the first floor. The moon shone through the glass with a sad and mysterious light. Then he reached the second floor. Look, this is the room where the painters were working. How was it he did not recognize it once? The steps of the man above had died away. So he must have stopped or hidden somewhere. Reached on the third floor. Should he go on? There was a silence. It was scary. He went on. The sound of his own footsteps shocked and frightened him. How dark it was. The man must be hiding in some corner here. Ah, the room was standing wide open. He hesitated and went in. It was very dark and empty in the hallway, as though everything had been moved out. He crawled on tiptoe into the living room, which was flooded with moonlight. Everything there was as before: the chairs, the mirror, the yellow sofa, and the pictures in the frames. A huge, round, reddish copper moon looked in at the windows. It's the moon that makes it so quiet, weaving some mystery, he thought. He stood and waited a long time, and the more silent the moonlight, the more wildly his heart beat, until it was painful, and still the same quiet. Suddenly, he heard a short, sharp crack like the snapping of a twig, and all was quiet again. A fly flew up suddenly and hit the window pane with a sad buzz. At that moment, he noticed in the corner between the window and the little cupboard something like a coat hanging on the wall. Why is that coat here? He thought. It wasn't there before. He went up to it quietly and felt that there was someone hiding behind it. He carefully moved the coat and saw, sitting on a chair in the corner, the old woman bent double so that he couldn't see her face. But it was she. He stood over her. She's afraid, he thought. He secretly took the axe from the loop and hit her one blow, then another on the head. But strange to say, she did not move, as though she were made of wood. He was frightened, bent down closer, and tried to look at her. But she, too, bent her head lower. He bent right down to the ground and looked up into her face from below. He looked and turned cold with horror. The old woman was sitting and laughing, shaking with quiet laughter, doing her best that he should not hear it. Suddenly, he imagined that the door from the bedroom was open a little, and that there was a laughter and whispering inside. He was overcome with madness, and he began hitting the old woman on the head with all his strength. But at every blow of the axe, the laughter and whispering from the bedroom grew louder, and the old woman was simply shaking with joy. He was running away, but the hallway was full of people. The doors of the rooms stood open, and on the landing, on the stairs, and everywhere below there were people, rows of heads, all looking, but crowded together in silence, waiting. Something squeezed his heart. His legs were stuck to the spot. They would not move. He tried to scream and woke up. He drew a deep breath, but his dream seemed strangely to continue. His door was thrown open, and a man whom he had never seen stood in the doorway, watching him carefully. Raskolnikov had hardly opened his eyes, and he instantly closed them again. He lay on his back without moving. Raskolnikov thinking, is it still a dream? He wondered, and again raised his eyelids barely at all. The stranger was standing in the same place, still watching him. He stepped carefully into the room, gently closing the door after him. Went up on the table, paused a moment, still keeping his eyes on Raskolnikov, and quietly sat himself on the chair by the sofa. He put his hat on the floor beside him and rested his hands on his cane and his chin on his hands. It was clear that he was ready to wait forever. As far as Raskolnikov could tell from his secret glances, he was a man no longer young, heavy, with a full light, almost white beard. 10 minutes passed. It was still light, but beginning to get dark. There was complete silence in the room. Not a sound came from the stairs. Only a big fly buzzed and begged against the window pane. It was unbearable at last. Raskolnikov suddenly got up and sat on the sofa. Raskolnikov, Come, tell me what you want. I knew you were not asleep, but only pretending. The stranger answered oddly, laughing calmly. Arkady Ivanovich Svidrigailov. Allow me to introduce myself. Here ends the part 3, last chapter. Now we will continue with part 4 next time. Till then, peace.